Was Bob Myers so important to the infrastructure of this franchise that this is truly the beginning of the end, the first domino to fall from this core, from this dynasty? Honestly, I thought he was coming back. I thought that it was leverage, money, even though the reports were it wasn't, usually it is, but clearly I was wrong because you heard the news yesterday. Bob Myers is walking away from a dynasty that he's had his hands all over for the last 10 years. Before we talk about the future and what that means, let's talk about what he brought to the table and who Bob Myers was within this dynasty. And everybody has a toolbox, a tool set, strengths and weaknesses. And I think it was very clear that Bob Myers was a relationship guy, right? And his ability to balance relationships, build them, build trust was a huge part of the culture of what the Warriors are doing, right? And the other aspect of it, I think that his ability to manipulate the CBA, contracts, salaries, draft picks, those two strengths, those were his two superpowers as a general manager. Have you ever given a bad Father's Day gift? I know I have. I know I've gotten a few too, right? But shopping for dad is tough, man. How many novelty coffee mugs can you give him, right? And so that's where Ridge Wallet comes in. They sent me the wallet along with the key case about a month ago. I chose the gunmetal here. And honestly, there's no break-in time. It's slick from day one. And it's one of those things you don't really appreciate until you have it. And then you're like, dude, why would I ever use a different type of wallet? This is too slick. You can fit 12 cards into it, plus cash. It's got an RFTD coding on it, so you can't get scanned. You know what I mean? And then the key case keeps your keys in place. It can fit up to 6 keys. But what I love most about it is just the slim profile of both of these products. It really doesn't matter what type of clothing I'm in, gym shorts, slacks. I can keep both of these things in my pockets comfortably and no one can notice. So if you want to find the best Father's Day gift, click my link in the description, Ridge Wallet Alchemy, head to the website and get up to 40% off until June 15th. Now, you could point to all sorts of maneuvers he's pulled off with salary and roster spots during this run, but let's look at KD leaving and him turning that from D'Lo to Wiggins and Kuminga. Right. And then remember, he had to trade Andre to Memphis to fill the salary and draft picks. It happened very quickly. Right. And yet you have to understand the salary and how that works and how you could fit that in. But most importantly, it was the relationship. And it was the relationship with Kevin Durant that allowed him to pull off the sign and trade. KD didn't have to help him and help the Warriors when he left for Brooklyn. He was a free agent. Right. And, a lot of GMs, I'm sure they have all the contacts in their phone. Right. But I think when Bob Myers calls, people pick up. And I don't think you can understate that when it comes to being a general manager. It's people pick up the phone and listen. He's built trust and relationships. And that goes a long way when it comes to making these complicated deals. It's one thing to understand the numbers. It's another thing for someone to understand or pick up, listen, and agree to perhaps helping you out. Right. And you saw Bob do that over and over again in this position for the Warriors. And then the in-house relationship building and managing, and all we have to do is circle Draymond Green and all those incidences and how Bob has finessed that and dealt with that and been, I think really the leader in dealing with in-house issues as he probably should have. Right. But he did it very well. Right. But I think the interesting and important thing to talk about is the relationship between he and Joe Lacob. And I want to say this before I get into this because I don't want this to get misconstrued. Joe Lacob, I think, is one of the best owners in all of sports. I am super grateful for him and what he's done for this organization. However, a lot of the time in life, your strength can lead into your weakness. Your strength can be your weakness because it's your strength and it causes a blind spot, right? And you lean into it maybe too much. And so Joe Lacob, ultra aggressive, ultra hands-on as an owner, which has the proof is in the pudding, right? But how much of that has been filtered through Bob Myers? How many suspect decisions has Bob Myers saved us from over this tenure? Maybe that's not fair, and maybe we'll never know, right? But I think that that's a big part of the relationships and the chain of command. And you can look no further than the James Wiseman incident, right? And you clearly Lacob and some of these front office guys wanted Wiseman to have more of an opportunity. Kerr wasn't feeling it, and Bob, once again, was the middleman. It was those situations, and I think that there were tons of them that we never even really realized were happening behind the scenes. And again, that's a credit to Bob Myers' finesse. And so ultimately, I think that that's my biggest concern is with Bob Myers gone, as grateful as I am for Joe Lacob owning this team, is his strength going to lead to his weakness? Is he going to tinker too much? Is he going to take too much of a hands-on approach without Bob Myers being that middleman, being that filtration system to the rest of the organization? Again, I know I'm operating under assumptions, but reading between the lines and again, pointing to that Wiseman situation, it feels like that happened quite often. Let's get into, I'm sure by now you've heard the name Mike Dunleavy Jr. OG fans, you know him well. It's so weird that he's in this position, right? And he's been, kind of on Bob Myers' hip the last few seasons as a scout, right? It seems as though they've been grooming him, and now it sounds like he is the favorite to replace Bob Myers as the general manager. The other name that I've heard being thrown out there is Kirk Lacob, which is Joe's son, who's been a part of the organization for a long while. And I think that Joe Lacob is aware of the optics of that and the pressure that would put on his son. And so I don't think they'll do that, right? I think it's going to be Dunleavy. It's interesting, though. Shout out to MT over at The Athletic, because I heard him make a great point. He was like, nah, despite what the optics are, Kirk Lacob would be the one who could push back the most at his dad, right? If you think about it that way, that makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, I think that the optics of putting his son in that position, he's being in the Bay Area, he's seen what Al Davis and the Raiders situation, and it's just too much pressure. So I think it's going to be Mike Dunleavy Jr., who again has been a scout for the Warriors and been on Bob Myers' hips for the last couple of years. And, listen, I don't know if he's going to have he's not going to have the relationship building skills of a Bob Myers, because that was an elite skill of Bob Myers, right? He's not going to have that long contact list. Although Mike Dunleavy has been a part of the NBA for like 20 years, right? So I'm sure he has plenty of context and stuff like that. But I think that where his strength is going to lie is in talent evaluation, right? And talking about Bob's tenure here, that would be the one area that and again, it may not be fair because we don't truly know who is making all these decisions, but all you have to do is look at the draft picks over the last 10 years, and they haven't been great, right? There's been some, you can point to Loon, right? The pool pick was supposedly Mike Dunleavy Jr.'s, right? But you know the list, right? And so talent evaluating, I don't necessarily think was Bob Myers' strength. But then again, to be fair, I'm not sure how much of the decision-making he was making on those draft picks. But I think that that's where Dunleavy can shine moving forward. And I think when you look at this core and moving beyond the Steph Curry era, eventually it has to happen. I think that talent evaluating is going to be more important than what it was for Bob Myers, right? The talent was already there, right? And so now that's where the relationships and management was so important. But eventually moving forward, they're going to have to accumulate talent. And so while Mike may not have those relationships, I think that he's going to be able to spot and identify talent at a greater level than what we saw Bob Myers do. Now, will the rest of the organization listen to him? How much power will he actually have? That's the question. Ultimately, it has to be a collaborative effort when it comes to those decisions in evaluating talent. And so hopefully, if it is Dunleavy, at least the relationship between Lacob, Dunleavy, and Kerr, I think that's the most important thing moving forward. What are the rumors? What are some of the things you're saying as far as Bob Myers? Is he's taking the year off? I've heard, hey, is he going to go be the Knicks GM and president? What about the Clippers? Is Ballmer just going to throw him a super bag? I've even heard, hey, Steve Kerr, is he going to take over for Pop? Again, is this the first domino to fall? Is it all going to fall apart because Bob Myers secretly behind the scenes was holding it all together? I'd say that once again, we're probably not giving Steph Curry enough credit, right? This starts and stops with Steph. And I think Steve as well. I think Steve and Steph are going to keep this thing together as long as they want to, right? And when you listen to Bob Myers say, this is a job where you have to be 1,000% in, all in, and I can no longer do that. Listen, I absolutely believe there's a burnout, right? With the pressure, when you win like that and it's championship or bust for 10 years, I can't imagine the pressure, and the pressure that Lacob applies to him is true. But I think ultimately the root of it is Bob Myers, his strength became his weakness within the organization. He built so many strong relationships within the core, within Draymond, Steph, Kerr, all these guys, that he realized he can no longer make the objective decisions moving forward. And so I think that ultimately this was probably the perfect time for him to move on. I think the question is, does that eventually happen to Steve Kerr? It happens to everyone at a certain point. There's a burnout in the sports world, right? But does Kerr reach a certain point where his relationships with the vets, the core, have become so close, so tight that he objectively can't coach properly? Now, that's probably for another video and another discussion, but ultimately, you see what I'm saying. I think this is the right time. My concern is Lacob going to have too much of a hands-on approach? Is he going to get too aggressive? We know that he is very forward-thinking, and it feels like he's anxious to the next big thing, right? To the future, instead of letting this core ride off into the sunset. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, right? It's you don't want to wait till it's too late, but if you do it too soon, right, it's never the right time type of situation. And so, yeah, man, shout out to Bob Myers, because I think that there's no doubt he was a huge part in this run lasting this long, and I think he was the perfect guy for the job, the perfect situation. But as the situation changes, I think he's realized he's not the right guy for the job. And shout out to him for realizing that, right? And I'm excited, man, about the future. And I think that the positive is that with Dunleavy in place, maybe he can more objectively have these hard conversations moving forward and make some better decisions. The 19th pick, we know this is going to be a big summer for the entire league. Half the so-called contenders in the league feel like they've got to make a move. And so I think this is going to be an exciting draft and free agency here. I'm covering the draft on my Patreon. I've got 2 scouting reports out, Chris Murray and Leonard Miller. This week will be Derek Lively II, so patrons, check for that. But yeah, those are my thoughts on this Bob Myers situation. But shout out to Bob, man. I appreciate what you did for the franchise, and I'm still excited for the future. I don't think it's as doom and gloom as some people are making it. I think it was the right time. Hit that like, share, and subscribe. I'm out, y'all.